I've never considered myself the type to scare easily. You know, the kind of person who rolls their eyes at ghost stories and laughs off urban legends. So when my friends suggested camping near the site of a supposed massacre, I shrugged it off. A good scare never hurt anyone, right? We arrived at the campsite late in the afternoon, the sun still hanging low, casting long shadows through the dense forest. The place had an eerie calm to it. There was no wind, no sound of animals, just silence. It wasn't like the usual lively forests you see in movies. This place felt dead. But I didn't want to let it get to me. I wanted to be the brave one. The others were in high spirits, joking around, acting like we were just here for a typical weekend getaway. I remember Jake making some sarcastic comment about the legend, how campers had supposedly been butchered here years ago. Probably some crazy drifter, he said, chuckling as he set up his tent. Or maybe a bear, or aliens, who the hell knows? I laughed along with him, but deep down, something felt wrong. Not enough to stop me from setting up camp, but just wrong. It was that feeling you get when you're being watched, but every time you turn around there's nothing there. After a while the tents were up and the sun was setting faster than I expected. The sky turned a dark shade of purple and soon, the only light came from the small fire we built in the center of our camp. We gathered around it, roasting marshmallows and talking about random stuff, work, relationships, and dumb things we did in high school. Normal conversations to drown out the creeping sense of unease that was slowly settling in. But it was hard to ignore how quiet the forest was. I've camped before, and usually you'd hear the rustling of leaves, the hoot of an owl, or the occasional scurry of a small animal. Here, there was nothing. It was unnatural. As the fire crackled, Jake started telling the story again, how years ago, a group of campers just like us had come to this very spot and never left. They were found days later, mutilated beyond recognition. Limbs torn off, faces unrecognizable. Some say it was a wild animal, but others think something much worse happened. A ritual, maybe. Some sort of sacrifice. The moment he said sacrifice, the fire flickered violently, like a gust of wind had hit it, but there was no wind. The flames danced higher for a second, casting weird, twisting shadows on the trees around us. We all went silent, eyes darting around, trying to make sense of what just happened. Then, from the woods, we heard it, a whisper. Soft, almost like the wind carrying a voice. But it wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too human. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. The others looked at me, confused, like they hadn't heard a thing. Maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe the spooky stories were starting to get to me. Jake shrugged, tossing another log on the fire. "Relax, man. It's probably just the trees creaking or some shit." He tried to laugh it off, but I could see it in his eyes. He heard it too. He just didn't want to admit it. That night, as the fire died down and we crawled into our tents, the feeling of unease only grew. The silence outside was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Something was out there, watching, waiting. And as I lay there in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open, I swore I could hear it again. The whisper. Closer this time. Sleep was elusive that night. I lay there, listening, straining to hear anything beyond the confines of my tent, the silence heavy and oppressive. It pressed against me, filling the small space with an unseen weight, a suffocating stillness that felt almost alive. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that the eerie calm of the forest was a natural occurrence, that I was overthinking it. But that voice? It still echoed faintly in my mind, a whisper on the edge of hearing, teasing the borders of my sanity. At some point, exhaustion must have overtaken me, for I drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sound, soft, faint, but unmistakable. It was a rustling just outside my tent. My heart began to race, the kind of frantic, uneven pounding that makes every breath feel labored, every second an eternity. I sat up slowly, careful not to make a sound, straining my ears to catch it again. The rustling continued, this time closer, more deliberate, like the dragging of something across the ground. My mind raced with explanations. An animal perhaps, or one of the others playing a cruel joke. But the forest had been so still, so unnervingly devoid of life. What creature could possibly be moving out there now? With trembling hands, I reached for the zipper of my tent, pausing for what felt like a lifetime before pulling it down. The sound of the zipper, though quiet, seemed impossibly loud in the suffocating silence, as if announcing my intentions to whatever lay outside. As I peeked out, the moonlight filtered weakly through the trees, casting pale, ghostly shadows on the campsite. Everything appeared as it should, tents undisturbed, the fire reduced to glowing embers. But then my eyes caught movement, something at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the light. I squinted, trying to focus, and for a moment, I was certain I saw a figure standing among the trees, motionless, as if carved from the shadows themselves. It was tall, unnaturally still, its form obscured by the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, heart hammering against my chest. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that my mind, so full of Jake's twisted stories, was playing tricks on me. But the cold knot of fear in my stomach told me otherwise. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe for what felt like hours, though it must have only been minutes. Suddenly, from one of the other tents, I heard a sound, someone stirring, then a low, whispered voice. "Jake? Jake, is that you?" It was Sarah, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "No." Jake's voice came, groggy and confused. "What's going on?" Sarah's tent rustled, and I could see her head poking out. "I thought I heard something," she murmured, her eyes scanning the same spot where I had seen the figure. "I did too," I whispered, finally finding my voice, though it came out weaker than I intended. "There's something out there." Jake climbed out of his tent, shaking his head as if to dismiss the whole ordeal. "It's just your imagination," he said, his voice trying to sound calm but betraying a faint edge of unease. "There's nothing out here but us." But even as he said it, his eyes kept darting to the edge of the clearing, to that spot in the trees where the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. We stood there in tense silence for what felt like an eternity, the air thick with an invisible menace. I kept expecting the figure to reappear, to step out of the shadows and into the moonlight, to confirm that what I'd seen had been real. But nothing came. Eventually, Jake sighed, shaking his head again. "We're freaking ourselves out over nothing. Let's just go back to sleep." He retreated to his tent, though I could see the stiffness in his movements, the way his eyes lingered on the darkened woods. Sarah followed reluctantly, her face pale, her hands trembling. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there, eyes wide open, listening to the silence, waiting for the rustling to return, for the figure to emerge once more. And just as I was about to convince myself that it had all been a trick of the light, I heard it again. The whisper. Closer now. Too close. That whisper, the sound of a breath just beyond my reach, haunted me. I lay frozen in the dark confines of my tent, my body stiff, my heart racing. It wasn't the wind, nor the creak of the forest settling. No, this was something deliberate, something with intent. The kind of sound that pierces the stillness and crawls beneath your skin, urging your mind to grasp the impossible truth hiding in the silence. I could feel the weight of it pressing against the thin fabric of my tent, as though something lingered outside, mere inches from where I lay. The air was thick, choking, each breath heavy with the stench of fear. For a moment, I entertained the maddening thought that it could hear me, that whatever it was could feel the frantic beating of my heart, could sense the rising panic coursing through my veins. I don't know how long I remained like that, trapped in my paralysis, waiting for the whisper to return. Time stretched, warped by the terror gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Finally, I summoned what little courage I had left. I had to move, to prove to myself that I was still in control, that I wasn't merely a prisoner of my own mind. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head toward the zippered entrance of my tent, my eyes wide in the pitch black. My fingers trembled as they gripped the edge of the zipper, every inch of me protesting against the idea of opening it, of exposing myself to whatever lurked outside. But I had to know. I had to see. As I pulled the zipper down, inch by excruciating inch, the sound felt deafening in the quiet night. It was as though every metallic click rang out into the darkness, alerting the unseen presence that I was coming. I hesitated for a moment, my breath shallow, before finally parting the flap and peering outside. The campfire had long since died, leaving nothing but cold embers, faintly glowing like the last vestiges of life being extinguished. The moon was high, its pale light filtering weakly through the dense canopy of trees, casting jagged shadows across the campsite. And there, just beyond the glow of the embers, I saw it. A figure. It stood at the edge of the clearing, unmoving, like a statue carved from shadow. My breath hitched in my throat as my eyes locked onto it. There was something unnatural in its stillness, as though it wasn't bound by the laws of this world. My mind screamed at me to look away, to close the tent and hide, but I was rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on the figure. It was taller than any person should be, its form distorted and elongated, like a grotesque mockery of humanity. And though the details of its face were hidden in the gloom, I could feel its gaze on me. It didn't need eyes. The weight of its attention was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. For a moment, neither of us moved. The figure and I were locked in a silent standoff, separated by a few feet of darkness. But then it shifted, just slightly, a barely perceptible movement that sent a shiver down my spine. It leaned forward, as if beckoning me to step closer, to cross the threshold into whatever nightmare awaited beyond the clearing. I jerked back into my tent, zipping it up with shaking hands, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might burst. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but no explanation would come. It was something beyond understanding, beyond reason, something not of this world. I tried to calm myself, to slow my breathing, but the effort was futile. I could still feel it out there, waiting, watching. And then, as if to confirm my deepest fears, the whisper returned. But this time, it wasn't from the forest. It was inside the tent. I gasped, spinning around, my back pressed against the wall of the tent, my eyes wide in the suffocating darkness. There was no one else there, but the whisper persisted. A low, insidious hiss that seemed to come from all directions at once, filling the small space, invading my mind. I clenched my fists, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The words, though indecipherable, slithered through my thoughts, planting seeds of dread that threatened to consume me whole. Something was wrong here. Terribly, inexplicably wrong. And I was starting to believe that we had stumbled upon something far darker than a legend. Something that didn't want us here. And it wasn't going to let us leave. Morning came, though I questioned if I had ever truly slept. The weight of the previous night clung to me like a heavy, oppressive fog, and though the sun had risen, the light seemed pale, weak, as though the forest itself was reluctant to let go of the darkness. I emerged from my tent, my legs unsteady, eyes hollow with fatigue and fear, expecting, no, hoping to see my terror dismissed by the clarity of daylight, but nothing felt right. The air was still, unnaturally so, as if the forest had held its breath, waiting. Even the birds, whose songs should have greeted the dawn, were silent. The entire world around us seemed watching, waiting. Jake was already up, poking at the remnants of the campfire, trying to coax a flame from the dampened wood. His face, usually full of reckless confidence, was drawn, his eyes betraying the same fear that gnawed at my insides. Sarah sat a few feet away, staring into the dying embers as if lost in some distant, unreachable place. She hadn't said a word since we left the tents. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen last night, the figure, the whisper that haunted my very soul, but the words wouldn't come. A part of me didn't believe it had been real, while another part feared that speaking of it might somehow summon it back. Instead, I busied myself with menial tasks, rolling up sleeping bags, sorting through supplies, anything to distract myself from the unease that permeated the camp. But the silence was unbearable. "Did you guys hear anything last night?" I asked, my voice faltering as I broke the tension that hung thick between us. Jake stopped fussing with the fire, his eyes flicking toward me, searching. He hesitated before answering, as if weighing whether to admit what he felt, what he feared. "I heard, I don't know, something. Thought it was just the wind at first, but..." He trailed off, staring into the smoldering coals, his voice thick with unspoken fear. "There was something out there, wasn't there?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "I saw it," I whispered, barely able to form the words. "A figure in the trees. It was watching us." Sarah's eyes snapped up at that, wide and glistening with unshed tears. "I heard it too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That voice, it was like someone was inside my head, whispering right into my ear. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Whatever haunted us in the darkness had reached her too. The feeling of vulnerability, of helplessness, was overwhelming. I glanced toward the forest, half expecting to see the figure standing there again, just beyond the trees, waiting for the sun to sink beneath the horizon once more. The daylight had done nothing to banish the horrors of the night. Jake stood abruptly, his face set in grim determination. "We need to leave," he said, his voice firm but laced with tension. "This place, it's wrong. We should have never come here." For once, I found no argument in me. Every fiber of my being screamed to escape, to flee from this cursed place. But when I glanced at Sarah, she shook her head slowly. "We can't." Her voice trembled, but there was something in her eyes, something distant and resigned. "The car, the keys, they're gone." "What?" Jake's voice was sharp now, a mix of disbelief and anger. "What do you mean they're gone? I left them in my bag." "I checked," she said softly. "They're not there." A wave of dread washed over me. It wasn't just the missing keys, it was the impossibility of it all. There had been no one else here. No one could have taken them. And yet, in this cursed place, nothing felt impossible anymore. The very air felt thick with malice, as if the forest itself conspired to keep us here, to trap us in the nightmare. Panic surged through Jake's voice as he rummaged through his bag, tossing clothes and supplies aside, muttering curses under his breath. But it was no use. The keys were gone, and with them, any hope of an easy escape. "What the hell is happening here?" Jake whispered, his voice shaking as he sank to the ground, defeated. None of us had an answer. We sat there in the growing warmth of the day, but it offered no comfort. The sun seemed weaker than it should have been, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch too far, too long, as if they were reaching out for us. I caught Sarah glancing at the woods again, her eyes flicking nervously to the darkened underbrush. I could see it in her face. The same fear I felt gnawing at my sanity. She sensed it too. We weren't alone. The sun had reached its zenith, yet it gave no warmth. The air around us seemed to tremble with a strange, oppressive energy. Despite the daylight, I could not shake the feeling that the forest was holding its breath, waiting for night to fall again, to reclaim us. Each moment, every sound, felt as though it were being swallowed by the unseen eyes watching us from the trees. We were trapped in a waking nightmare, one that clung to us with an unnatural persistence. Jake stood by the fire pit, his face hard with frustration and helplessness. He had tried to argue, to reason with the reality of our situation, but it was futile. The keys were gone, and though we searched everywhere, turning over bags, looking under rocks, even retracing our steps around the camp, they had vanished as if they had never existed. The forest, it seemed, had claimed them, just as it had claimed our hope of escape. "We have to find another way," Jake muttered, pacing in short, frantic bursts. "We can't just sit here and wait for whatever's out there to come for us." His voice wavered, betraying the thin veil of courage he was desperately trying to cling to. I said nothing. My eyes drifted toward the trees again, those dark, hulking shadows looming at the edge of our camp, their branches twisting unnaturally in the still air. The whisper from last night echoed in my mind, a low hiss that felt more like a warning now. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not merely being watched, we were being hunted. Sarah sat nearby, knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed on the fire pit, as though the dead embers held some secret that might protect us. Her silence unnerved me more than anything. It was as if she had resigned herself to our fate, as if she already knew what was waiting for us when night fell. The weight of that knowledge crushed my spirit. A snapping twig broke the silence. My heart leapt in my chest as I whipped my head toward the sound, eyes wide with terror. But there was nothing. Nothing but the dense, tangled underbrush, the darkened paths between the trees that seemed to beckon us deeper into the woods. I clenched my fists, the sweat on my palms cold against the afternoon heat. "We need to stay together," I said finally, my voice tight, strained. "No splitting up, no wandering off. Whatever's out there, it's playing with us." Jake nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. He was trying to stay strong for all of us, but I knew he felt it too, the presence, the malevolent force that circled us like a predator stalking its prey. There was no escape, not from this. Hours passed, though it felt like days, the suffocating silence hanging over us like a shroud. We spoke little, each of us consumed by our own dread. The sun, so high and blinding before, now began its slow descent behind the towering trees, casting long, crooked shadows across the camp. The sinking light seemed to drain the color from the world, leaving everything washed in a sickly hue of gray. With each passing moment, my unease grew. The whispers that had plagued me in the night returned, but this time, they lingered just at the edge of hearing. Faint, almost imperceptible. I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me, or if someone was truly calling out to us from the depths of the forest. I glanced at Sarah, expecting to see her locked in her silent vigil, but her expression had changed. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide, lips trembling. She was staring into the trees, not at nothing, but at something. Her hand slowly rose, pointing shakily into the darkened woods. "There? Do you see it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained terror. Jake and I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, an endless maze of black limbs and twisted vines. But then, just as my breath caught in my throat, I saw it. A shape. It was there, deep in the woods, barely visible, cloaked in shadow. Tall, impossibly tall. Its form seemed to shift and distort as though it were made of the very darkness that surrounded it. My mind rebelled at what I was seeing, refusing to make sense of the horror before me. The figure, it stood motionless, as if waiting for us to acknowledge its presence, to confront the nightmare it carried with it. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed, taking a step back, his hand clutching the knife at his side as if it would protect him. But I knew better. There was no weapon that could fend off what we faced. No human force could stand against the terror lurking just beyond the tree line. The figure did not move. It stood, a silent witness to our fear, feeding off the panic rising between us. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, thudding so loudly I was sure it would draw it closer. My mouth went dry. My legs felt weak beneath me, as though the earth itself had shifted and was about to swallow me whole. Then, without warning, the figure melted back into the shadows. Gone, as if it had never been there. But I knew the truth. It was still there, just beyond sight, waiting for the cover of darkness, waiting to strike. The sun dipped lower. Night was coming, and so were they. Night fell like a heavy curtain, choking the last vestiges of light from the sky, plunging us into the abyss of darkness we had dreaded since dawn. The fire we had managed to kindle sputtered weakly, its flames flickering as if struggling against an unseen force that sought to extinguish even this feeble beacon. The oppressive gloom pressed in from all sides, the trees looming like the bars of a cage, trapping us in this cursed place. I sat close to the fire, though its warmth offered no comfort, no reprieve from the cold that gnawed at my bones. It was the kind of cold that seeped into the soul, not born of the air, but of fear. An ancient, primal fear that whispered of things unseen, of horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I glanced at Jake, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared into the forest. His knuckles were white as he gripped the handle of his knife, though I knew the blade was useless against what haunted us. Beside me, Sarah had grown disturbingly still, her face pale and gaunt, as if the very life had been drained from her. Her eyes, once full of fear, now seemed hollow, vacant, staring into nothingness. I reached out to her, my hand trembling, and placed it gently on her shoulder. "Sarah," I whispered, though my voice barely carried in the thick, suffocating air. "We need to stay together. We can't let them." "They're here," she murmured, cutting me off, her voice distant, as though she were speaking from some faraway place. Her eyes slowly turned toward me, glassy and unfocused. "They're here, and they won't leave us alone. Not now." My stomach churned. I felt the weight of her words like a stone pressing down on my chest. She was right. We had felt their presence since the night before, lurking just out of sight, watching us with malevolent intent. But now they were closer, too close. The wind stirred, and with it came a sound, a faint rustling like leaves moving in the breeze. But it wasn't the wind. It couldn't be. The trees had been still all day, yet now they shivered as if in response to something unnatural. I strained my ears, trying to locate the source of the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around us like the voices of the dead. And then, from the depths of the woods, I heard it. A whisper. Low, insidious, barely audible, but unmistakably there. It slithered through the trees, carrying with it the weight of centuries of suffering, of pain, of madness. I could not make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, malicious, mocking, as if the very forest itself was laughing at us, reveling in our terror. I turned to Jake, my voice hoarse with panic. "Do you hear that? The whispering?" He nodded, his face pale in the dim light of the fire. "Yeah, I hear it. I've been hearing it all day, but it's louder now." Louder. Closer. The whispers were no longer distant, no longer confined to the shadows. They were here, among us, swirling like a living thing, wrapping around our minds, seeping into our thoughts. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block them out, but it was no use. The whispers were inside me now, crawling beneath my skin, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I glanced at Sarah again, my heart sinking as I saw her lips moving silently, as though she were speaking to someone. Her eyes were fixed on a point just beyond the trees, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I thought I saw a figure standing there. Tall, impossibly tall, just as it had been earlier. But this time, it did not vanish. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was still there, watching, its form shifting in the darkness. I couldn't see its face, if it even had one, but I could feel its gaze, piercing, malevolent, burning into me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. And then, it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped closer, its long limbs unfolding with unnatural grace. Each step was soundless, yet I felt the earth tremble beneath its weight. My heart pounded in my chest, my body frozen in place, as if some unseen force held me in its grasp, preventing me from fleeing, from screaming. The air grew thick, suffocating, as though the forest itself was closing in on us, tightening its grip with each passing second. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my head with a cacophony of voices, each one more urgent than the last. I could hear them now, clearer than before, their words like daggers in my mind. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have disturbed us. Now you belong to the forest." I tried to speak, to warn Jake, but my voice had been stolen by the fear that gripped me. I looked to him, my eyes wide with terror, but he too was transfixed, staring at the figure as it drew nearer and nearer. Sarah stood, her movements slow and unnatural, as if she were being pulled by some invisible force. Her eyes were still glazed, her lips still moving in that silent conversation. She stepped toward the figure, her feet dragging through the dirt, her body swaying like a puppet on strings. "Sarah, no." I finally found my voice, but it was too late. She was already gone, lost to whatever madness had taken hold of her. The figure was nearly upon her now, its shadow swallowing her whole, and then, in the blink of an eye, they were gone. Both of them. The whispers fell silent, and I was alone. I stood there, trembling, ensnared by the shroud of darkness that enveloped me like a funeral pall. The silence that followed the harrowing disappearance of Sarah and Jake felt oppressive, a heavy blanket that stifled my breath. I strained my ears, expecting the whispers to return, but only the echoes of my own heart pounded in the stillness, a frantic drumbeat of despair. Panic clawed at my throat, constricting my ability to think clearly. I had lost them to the insatiable darkness that had ensnared us from the moment we had stepped into this cursed woodland. The fire flickered feebly, casting ghostly shadows that danced around me as if mocking my fear. I stumbled back, my mind racing, searching for an escape, a path that would lead me away from this nightmare. But where could I flee? The forest loomed like a great beast, its branches twisting and writhing, each one an outstretched claw, ready to snatch me into its maw. It felt alive, sentient, aware of my every breath, every quiver of my heart. A chill crept up my spine, and I turned to the path we had taken earlier, but the shadows had thickened, twisting the familiar into a labyrinth of terror. I stumbled forward, desperate to put distance between myself and the place where Sarah had vanished. My pulse quickened, each footfall echoing loudly in the stillness, a drum of dread announcing my fear to whatever malignant entity lurked within the trees. I could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes watched me, their gaze unyielding, their intentions malicious. As I forged ahead, the dark forest seemed to warp and shift around me, every rustle and crack a portent of doom. I could not help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see Jake's anguished face or Sarah's lost eyes staring back at me from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the suffocating blackness that threatened to swallow me whole. I soon found myself in a small clearing, the moonlight casting an ethereal glow upon the ground. The sight should have offered me solace, yet it only deepened my unease. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and I was overcome with an irresistible urge to flee, to run until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. But something caught my eye, a glint amidst the underbrush. With cautious steps I approached, my breath hitching in my throat as I knelt to inspect it. It was a silver locket, tarnished with age, the surface marred by time and neglect. As I opened it, a faded photograph slipped out, a picture of a young woman, her face obscured by shadows, but her eyes shone with a sorrow that pierced my heart. In that moment, I felt a connection, a whisper of recognition that sent shivers racing through my body. It was as if I had unearthed a fragment of the past, a remnant of those who had suffered in this accursed place. The whispers began anew, now rising like a mournful chorus, their tone imbued with sorrow and despair. "You are not the first," they lamented. "You are not the last. This is not your home. You will never escape." I dropped the locket, horror flooding through me as I scrambled backward, desperate to distance myself from the accursed object. But the ground seemed to shift beneath me, and I stumbled, falling to my knees. The whispers surrounded me, a cacophony of voices entwined in a dreadful harmony, weaving a tapestry of pain that threatened to engulf my very soul. And then, through the cacophony, a single voice rose above the rest, cold and deliberate, chilling my blood. "Join us," it commanded, the word wrapping around me like a noose. "Join us in eternal torment." A shadow unfurled from the trees, a grotesque silhouette that crept toward me, exuding a palpable malevolence. My heart raced, pounding wildly against my ribcage as I pressed my palms to the ground, desperate to push myself away, but it was no use. The ground beneath me felt alive, writhing and shifting, pulling me closer to that insatiable darkness. "Where are they?" I screamed, my voice cracking under the weight of despair. "What have you done to them?" The figure paused, a laugh like the grinding of bones resonating in the stillness. "They have come home," it replied, its voice dripping with disdain. "As will you. You cannot resist the call of this place." I could feel my mind unraveling, threads of sanity slipping away, fraying like the tattered edges of a long-abandoned tapestry. I stumbled back, a wild animal driven by instinct, trying to escape the grip of whatever horror awaited me. But as I turned, the world twisted and blurred, the trees bending in grotesque shapes, and I was lost. In that moment, I was ensnared by the darkness that had claimed so many before me, the shadows weaving around my body, binding me in their cold embrace. The whispers grew louder, their cries of agony merging with my own terror, and as I was pulled into the depths of despair, I could feel the last vestiges of my humanity slipping away. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the night, leaving nothing but the echo of my own demise, a final testament to the madness that awaited anyone who dared to linger in the heart of the cursed woods. As the shadows closed in around me, I felt a chilling sensation spread through my body, like ice seeping into my very bones. It was as if the night itself had come alive, each breath I took laced with a miasma of despair. The oppressive weight of the forest bore down upon me, and I knew with an icy certainty that I was teetering on the precipice of madness. The figure, the wretched silhouette that had emerged from the depths, began to shift and swirl, morphing into a ghastly amalgamation of despair and torment. Its features flickered like a candle flame, revealing glimpses of those lost to this nightmarish domain. I could see their faces, twisted in agony, their mouths frozen in silent screams that reverberated through the air. Each visage was a testament to the malevolence that dwelled within this cursed woodland, a haunting reminder of the souls consumed by its dark embrace. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I turned to flee, but the forest seemed to conspire against me, the underbrush grasping at my legs, the roots entwining around my ankles as if to draw me down into the very bowels of the earth. I was trapped in a macabre ballet, a grotesque dance with shadows that threatened to swallow me whole. The whispers escalated, a cacophony of voices rising to a fever pitch, each one taunting and pleading, blurring the lines between terror and despair. "Why do you resist?" they crooned, their tones syrupy sweet, laden with an insidious charm. "You are one of us now. Embrace your fate." I shook my head, fighting against the tide of darkness that sought to envelop me, the voices pulling at my mind like threads unraveling a carefully woven tapestry. "No, "I am not one of you," I shouted, my voice cracking, reverberating through the oppressive gloom. "I will not join your ranks." But my defiance only seemed to amuse them. The figure moved closer, its form flickering with a sickly glow, and I could feel the cold seep deeper into my soul, igniting a primal terror within me. "You cannot escape the truth," it hissed, its breath a chilling wind that cut through the stillness. "This forest hungers for your despair, and it will consume you just as it has consumed the others." Suddenly, the whispers transformed, morphing into a single haunting voice that slithered through my mind like smoke. "They are here, trapped within the very fabric of this accursed place," it intoned. "Can you not feel their pain? They call to you, begging for release." In that moment, a vision flooded my mind, a swirling mass of memories and shadows that coalesced into the forms of my lost companions. I could see Jake, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah was beside him, her mouth moving silently, as if she were trapped in an eternal scream. They were surrounded by a swirling mist of darkness, their forms flickering like distant stars lost in a midnight sky. I fell to my knees, the cold earth biting into my flesh as I clawed at the ground, desperate to break free from the vice grip of despair. "No, I will not forsake you," I cried, the words a plea laced with both anger and sorrow. "I will find you. I will save you." "Foolish child," the voice mocked, echoing through the trees. "You cannot save them. They belong to the darkness now, just as you will soon belong." A tremor of despair coursed through me, and for a moment, I felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on my heart, threatening to extinguish the flickering flame of defiance within. But as I gazed into the darkness, I recalled the laughter we had shared, the moments of joy that had once defined our friendship. I would not surrender to this wretched fate. Summoning what little strength remained, I rose to my feet, my determination igniting a fire within my chest. "You will not take me. You will not have me." I shouted into the abyss, my voice reverberating against the trees, defiant and unyielding. With each step I took, I felt the shadows recoil, the whispers faltering as if my resolve had momentarily blinded them. I pressed on, driven by a singular purpose, the need to rescue my friends, to pierce the veil of darkness that threatened to consume us all. But the forest, alive with malevolent intent, shifted around me, creating an ever-changing maze designed to ensnare my very soul. Every rustle, every crack of a branch sent waves of panic coursing through my veins. I could feel the entity closing in, its presence palpable, breathing down my neck like a predator savoring the thrill of the chase. "Run, little one," it whispered, its breath cold against my ear. "Run as far as you can. But know this, there is nowhere to hide. We are everywhere, and we will always be watching." I ran. I ran with every ounce of strength I could muster, heart pounding in my chest like the tolling of a mournful bell. The forest blurred around me, shadows morphing into grotesque shapes, and yet, amid the chaos, the cries of my friends echoed in my mind. Jake's voice, Sarah's laughter, both urging me forward, demanding that I fight against the encroaching dark. In the distance, I could see a flicker of light, a promise of hope amidst the consuming void. With renewed vigor, I surged toward it, clinging to the thought of my friends, of escaping this nightmare that sought to imprison us all. But the shadows, relentless and cunning, would not let go so easily. With the flicker of light beckoning me like a distant star in the suffocating gloom, I pressed onward, heart pounding in a frantic rhythm that matched the dreadful cacophony of whispers swirling in my ears. The shadows writhed and shifted, as though alive, eager to reclaim what they had once lost. Every step I took felt like a step deeper into an abyss. And yet, I was compelled to move, propelled by a desperate yearning to escape this sinister prison. The light, a faint glimmer amidst the oppressive darkness, danced just out of reach, as though it were an elusive specter playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. Each time I believed I could grasp it, it seemed to fade, flickering like a dying ember in a chilling wind. The echoes of my companions' voices rang in my mind, urging me to hurry, to not succumb to despair. "Find us," they cried, their voices laced with anguish, mingling with the malevolent whispers that wrapped around my sanity like a shroud. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing at my skin, the forest a dark labyrinth intent on ensnaring me. Shadows darted in my periphery, taunting me with fleeting glimpses of figures that looked all too familiar. My friends, my dear companions, their faces distorted in terror. They appeared and vanished, flickering like candle flames extinguished by an unforgiving breeze. My heart raced as I reached out, but they melted into the ether, leaving only the echo of their presence behind. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, wrapping themselves around my mind like creeping vines, suffocating the very essence of my being. "You cannot save them," the voice hissed, a serpentine whisper that slithered into my thoughts. "You are lost as they are. Embrace your fate and join them in eternal darkness." "No," I shouted, my voice a desperate plea against the encroaching tide of insanity. "I will not succumb to your lies. I will find them, and I will bring them back." Yet with each word, doubt gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps they were gone, irrevocably lost to this nightmarish realm. The realization struck me with a bitter pang, a feeling of helplessness clawing at my heart like the specters of despair. What if I was destined to wander this hellish expanse forever, a mere echo of the person I once was? As I forged ahead, the light before me began to dim, flickering like a candle caught in a tempest. I quickened my pace, desperate to reach it, to find solace in its warm embrace. But the forest, with its gnarled roots and twisting branches, sought to thwart me at every turn. I could feel the weight of their malignant gaze upon me, the specters of those who had suffered, their hollow eyes boring into my very soul, demanding justice for their unending torment. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a clearing, and there at the center stood a tattered tent, its fabric hanging limply as if resigned to its fate. The sight of it sent a jolt through my heart. This was it, the cursed sanctuary that had once harbored their despair. The very air was thick with sorrow, suffused with an echo of the atrocities committed within its confines. A sickening feeling twisted in my stomach as I approached the tent, the whispers rising to a fevered pitch, urging me to turn back, to flee from the horrors that lay within. "Do not enter," they chorused, their voices like nails on a chalkboard, scraping against my sanity. "It is not for you to uncover the truth." But the truth was all I had left to cling to. I had to know what had transpired here, what dark secrets were buried beneath the weight of grief and despair. With trembling hands, I pulled aside the flap of the tent, the fabric parting with a reluctant sigh, as though it were mourning the intrusion. Inside, the dim light revealed a chaotic tableau. Sleeping bags lay strewn across the ground, their occupants lost to the night. Tattered photographs clung to the walls like memories refusing to fade, faces frozen in laughter, now tainted by a veil of sorrow. I felt their joy seep into my bones, contrasting sharply with the overwhelming dread that enveloped me. In the corner of the tent, I noticed an old journal, its pages yellowed and frayed with age. I reached for it, fingers trembling as I opened the cover, the spine creaking in protest. The words leapt from the pages like apparitions, each line dripping with anguish and despair. I read of the fateful night, the laughter that turned to screams, the warmth of companionship eclipsed by betrayal and bloodshed. I could feel their pain wash over me, and a deep horror rooted itself within my heart. It was not just a massacre, it was a revelation of humanity's darkest nature, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the depths of depravity that can lurk within even the most innocuous souls. Tears streamed down my face as the gravity of their plight pressed upon me, a weight I could scarcely bear. I was a witness now, and with that awareness came a chilling realization. I was not merely an observer, but a participant in this dance of death. The shadows closed in around me, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, echoing the cries of those who had suffered. "You have opened the door," they warned, their voices a haunting melody of despair. There is no turning back now. As the darkness enveloped me, I felt the chilling grip of despair tighten around my throat, suffocating me as I realized I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The abyss was beckoning, and I was powerless to resist its call. The moment I crossed the threshold into that cursed tent, the world outside faded into a distant memory, swallowed by an all-consuming darkness. The whispers that had plagued my mind now transformed into a chorus of anguished souls, their wails resonating within the very marrow of my bones. I felt as though I were teetering on the precipice of madness, a fragile thread separating me from the abyss that beckoned with insidious charm. The journal lay open in my trembling hands, its pages now a battleground for the phantoms of the past. Each word unfurled a tale more horrifying than the last, detailing the insidious unraveling of trust among those who had once called each other friends. A night of revelry, they had believed, would transform into a symphony of chaos, a cacophony of betrayal that would echo through eternity. I was engulfed in their despair, my heart a captive to the torment that had taken root in this very space. The air was thick with memories, suffused with the stench of fear and regret, as if the fabric of the tent itself held the cries of those who had suffered within. My own heartbeat grew erratic, thrumming in tandem with the sinister whispers that clawed at the edges of my sanity. And then, amidst the swirling shadows, a figure emerged, a specter wreathed in darkness, its features obscured, yet unmistakably human. The silhouette swayed, a grotesque marionette dancing to a melody only it could hear. A wave of recognition washed over me as the figure stepped closer, and I was struck by the familiar outline of one of my lost friends. "Will," the voice emerged, brittle and frayed, like an old record caught in a loop of despair. "You should not have come here." "Jessica?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper echoing in the confines of the tent. "Is it really you?" Her countenance flickered, a mosaic of light and shadow, as if the very fabric of reality was distorting around her. "I am no longer who I was," she replied, her tone laced with sorrow. "I am but a remnant, a fragment of the night that consumed us. You must leave, Will. Leave while you still can." I felt the chill of dread creeping along my spine. "But I can't. I need to understand. I need to know what happened to you all. Why did you not escape?" The shadows shifted around her, swallowing her figure momentarily, as if they sought to reclaim what they had lost. "Escape?" she echoed, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Do you think it is so simple? We were trapped by forces far greater than ourselves, by our own fears and doubts. It was not the darkness that killed us, but the darkness within." Her words struck me like a thunderclap, reverberating through the chambers of my mind. The very nature of the evil we faced was rooted not in the supernatural, but in the frailty of the human spirit, the susceptibility to despair and treachery. I felt my heart clench at the weight of her confession. "Jessica, please," I implored, stepping forward, desperate to bridge the gap between the living and the damned. "Tell me what I must do to save you, to save all of you." But the shadows enveloped her once more, and I could sense her slipping away, as if time itself sought to reclaim her. "You cannot save us, Will," she lamented, her voice growing fainter. "We are bound to this place, cursed to relive our last moments. You must break the cycle." Panic surged within me. How? How do I do that? "The truth lies buried beneath the sins of the past," she whispered, her form becoming translucent. "Face it, Will, or be consumed by it." As her figure dissipated into the ether, a cold gust swept through the tent, extinguishing the flickering light that had danced upon the pages of the journal. I was plunged into a void of inky darkness, the air thickening with a palpable malevolence. The whispers crescendoed, a chaotic symphony of despair enveloping me, drowning me in their sorrow. "Face the truth," they chanted, their voices a haunting echo that clawed at my mind. "Face your own darkness." I staggered backward, my heart racing as I fumbled in the dark, searching for some tangible anchor to reality. I felt the walls of the tent closing in around me, suffocating me in a cocoon of despair. The very shadows seemed to breathe, swirling like living things, eager to pull me down into the abyss that awaited. With every ounce of strength, I fought against the encroaching darkness, knowing that to succumb would mean surrendering, not just myself but the memory of my friends, those lost souls whose fates were now intertwined with mine. I had to confront the darkness within myself, to unearth the truth that lay buried beneath layers of fear and regret. As I clawed through the suffocating gloom, a flicker of determination ignited within me, propelling me forward. I had to delve into the abyss, to embrace the truth that had haunted me since that fateful night. I would face the darkness, not just for myself, but for all those who had fallen, who had been ensnared by the very demons they had sought to escape. In that moment, I understood. I was not just a witness to their suffering. I was the harbinger of their salvation. I would confront the horrors that awaited, armed with the knowledge that the fight against darkness was as much a part of me as the blood that coursed through my veins. And so, with a steely resolve, I plunged deeper into the heart of the void, ready to face whatever nightmares awaited me, determined to unearth the truth and perhaps, in doing so, find a way to save us all. The shadows that clung to the tent walls writhed and twisted, a grotesque ballet of despair that beckoned me to step further into their murky depths. Each breath I took was heavy with the weight of the past, the air thickening with an acrid stench, part decay, part longing, that wrapped around me like a shroud. It was a scent that spoke of lives lost, dreams extinguished, and the bitter taste of regret. I moved deeper into the tent, my fingers grazing the cold, damp fabric, which felt almost alive beneath my touch. The whispers of the damned rose in a mournful crescendo, their voices weaving an intricate tapestry of sorrow that enveloped me, binding me to this cursed place. The memory of Jessica's fading presence lingered, a ghostly echo urging me onward. "Face the truth," I repeated, my heart racing as I felt the walls press closer, the very air thickening with anticipation. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself were alive, waiting to divulge its secrets. I had come seeking answers, but now I sensed that the truth would demand its due, a price I was yet unaware of. In that moment of vulnerability, an overwhelming urge to flee surged within me. Yet the thought of abandoning Jessica, of leaving her soul trapped in this spectral limbo, ignited a fire in my heart. I would not be another victim of this malignant darkness. With every ounce of courage, I steeled myself, plunging deeper into the spectral fray. As I ventured forth, a sudden chill swept through the tent, causing my breath to crystallize in the air. The darkness deepened, becoming an oppressive force, and I felt the presence of something beyond comprehension lurking just out of sight. The whispers grew louder, converging into a singular voice, a cacophony of torment that spoke in chilling unison. Will, you cannot escape your fate," they chanted, their tones rising and falling like the tides of an unseen sea. "You have come to uncover what was never meant to be unearthed." I pressed my palms to my ears, attempting to drown out their cacophony, but it was futile. The voice was within me now, a parasite gnawing at my sanity. "You think you can free them? The truth will consume you." And in that moment, I felt it, an oppressive weight crashing upon me, as if the very tent sought to fold in on itself, collapsing under the gravity of its haunted history. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm that echoed the dread enveloping me. Just as despair threatened to drown me, a flicker of light ignited in the distance, piercing the surrounding darkness. It danced like a will-o'-the-wisp, beckoning me closer. Instinctively, I grasped the journal tightly, as if it were a lifeline anchoring me to reality. With hesitant steps, I approached the light, drawn by its warmth. The atmosphere shifted, the whispers fading into a haunting lullaby, coaxing me toward this beacon of hope. As I drew nearer, the light morphed into a figure, a radiant silhouette pulsing with an ethereal glow. "Will?" it called, a voice filled with familiarity and warmth. My breath caught in my throat as recognition washed over me. It was Sarah, another friend lost to that fateful night, a flickering memory of laughter and shared secrets now twisted by the darkness. "Sarah," I exclaimed, my voice trembling with a mixture of joy and fear. "Is it really you?" She stepped closer, her form shimmering with a ghostly luminescence. "You must listen to me. This place is not merely haunted, it is alive with the remnants of our sins. You've ventured deeper than any before. You must uncover the truth if you wish to save yourself and those who remain." The urgency in her voice struck a chord within me, igniting a fierce determination. "I need to know what happened, Sarah. What bound you all to this place?" A shadow flickered across her face, and I could see the sorrow etched into her ethereal features. "We were trapped by our own darkness, Will. We allowed our fears to breed suspicion, leading to betrayal and, ultimately, death. The anger, the resentment, it festered until it consumed us whole." Her words resonated deeply within me, revealing a painful truth I had feared to acknowledge. We had come to this place not merely to escape reality, but to confront the darkness that dwelled within our souls. And in that confrontation, we had forged chains that bound us to this cursed ground. "Tell me how to break these chains," I pleaded, desperation rising within me like bile. "How can I free you?" "The truth lies buried beneath the screams of the past," she murmured, her light flickering. You must confront the events of that night, relive them in their entirety. Only then can you sever the ties that bind us. In an instant, the light dimmed, casting me back into shadow. The whispers returned, louder than before, a tempest of anguish swirling around me. The realization struck me with chilling clarity. I had to descend further into the nightmarish memories, to unearth the terror I had buried deep within. Face it, the voices screamed, an overwhelming tide of anguish that threatened to pull me under. With my heart pounding in my chest, I resolved to confront the truth, no matter how horrifying. I would brave the abyss, descend into the darkness, and unearth the secrets hidden in the shadows. I steeled my resolve and prepared to face the horrors of that night. Every betrayal, every scream, knowing that the key to salvation lay in the truth, buried within the darkness that sought to consume me. As the cacophony of tortured souls intensified around me, I stood at the precipice of dread, peering into the abyss that threatened to consume my very essence. The air thickened with despair, a tangible weight pressing down upon me as I prepared to confront the specters of the past. Each heartbeat echoed the urgent rhythm of my resolve, pulsing in time with the anguished whispers that swirled like a tempest in the darkness. I had come to this forsaken camp seeking closure, seeking to unravel the sinister tapestry woven from the threads of my friends' fates. Yet, with every moment I lingered in this cursed place, I could feel the boundaries of reality thinning, as if the very fabric of my being was unraveling beneath the weight of forgotten sins. A vision flickered in my mind, a kaleidoscope of memories entwined with shadows and screams. The night of the massacre clawed its way to the forefront, dragging with it a flood of emotions long buried. Betrayal, jealousy, despair. These feelings surged like venom through my veins, igniting the terror that had laid dormant within me. Relive it. Sarah's voice echoed in my ears, a ghostly melody that beckoned me to the heart of the darkness. You must face what transpired. Only then can you set us free. With a shuddering breath, I surrendered to the tide of memories. The scene unfolded before me as if I were an unwilling actor on a stage, the darkness coalescing into a vivid panorama of horror. I saw the campfire flickering, the laughter of friends mingling with the crackling flames, a moment of innocent joy, now forever tainted. Then the shift, the shadows creeping in, wrapping around us like serpents. I felt the animosity brewing, hidden beneath layers of feigned camaraderie. Betrayal had festered in the hearts of those I once called friends, a poison that spread insidiously, leading to accusations and despair. Get away from me, a voice shrieked, cutting through the laughter like a knife. It was Jessica, her eyes wide with terror as she backed away from someone who had once been a confidant. You're lying. A figure loomed in the darkness, their features obscured, but I could sense the menace radiating from them. I was a mere spectator in this horrific reenactment, a witness to the unraveling of our friendship, a symphony of madness orchestrated by our own despair. As the confrontation escalated, I felt the desperation in the air thicken, suffocating us all. Each accusation echoed in my mind, the words slashing like razor blades, tearing at the bonds we had forged. And then the unspeakable, a scream, sharp and piercing, puncturing the night like a gunshot. The shadows erupted into chaos, bodies colliding, anger transforming into violence. In that moment, I understood. The seeds of our destruction had been sown by our own hands. We were not mere victims of fate, but the architects of our own demise. Each betrayal had drawn us closer to the precipice of annihilation. As the memories twisted into a frenzy of anguish, I stumbled backward, gasping for breath as the weight of guilt and despair crashed over me like a tidal wave. The darkness surged, an insatiable force threatening to swallow me whole. But amidst the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Sarah, her luminous form glowing brighter than the surrounding darkness. You must forgive, she urged, her voice cutting through the tumult. Forgive yourself and them. Only then can you break free. Forgiveness. The word reverberated through me, a faint glimmer of hope illuminating the suffocating darkness. It struck me then, this was the key. The chains that bound us were forged from our own fears, our own inability to let go. I had clung to the past, to the guilt that twisted in my heart like a vengeful spirit. With a newfound resolve, I reached out toward Sarah, grasping her ethereal hand. I forgive you, I whispered, the words spilling from my lips like a soft incantation. I forgive us all. The shadows recoiled, the whispers fading into a mournful sigh as the light surrounding Sarah intensified, illuminating the dark corners of the tent. In that moment of reckoning, I felt the weight of the past begin to lift, the chains of regret clattering to the ground. The air shifted, a cool breeze sweeping through the tent, washing away the lingering sorrow. The anguished faces of my friends, once twisted in pain, began to soften, transforming into serene visages of peace. I could see them now, no longer shackled by the darkness that had bound them. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her smile radiant as she began to fade into the light. "You have freed us." As she vanished, the tent shimmered around me, the shadows retreating into the corners. I stood amidst the remnants of our shared nightmares, the oppressive weight of despair lifted from my shoulders. A profound silence enveloped me, a silence that echoed with the promise of rebirth. With a final glance at the now empty tent, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its silvery light upon the forest, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once enveloped us. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh air, and felt an overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. As I turned to leave the haunted grounds behind, I knew that I would carry the memories of my friends with me, not as burdens, but as reminders of the fragile beauty of life, the importance of forgiveness, and the power of confronting one's own darkness. The shadows would always be a part of me, but now I would wield them not as chains, but as the ink of my story, one of redemption, resilience, and the enduring light of hope. Thank you for watching. This video, like all the others on the channel, is made especially for you who love chilling content. I put a lot of care into creating each one. Please support the channel by subscribing so you won't miss any notifications and can help it grow. Be sure to watch the video on your screen now so we can stay connected. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. See you in the next one.